Welcome to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, hosted by me, Zibby Owens. It's an award-winning podcast with over 1,900 episodes, all featuring authors of books you love and those you have yet to discover. Listen daily 5 times a week. Then go to zibbymedia.com and learn more about what the LA Times called the Zibbyverse. Zibby Media includes Zibby's Bookshop, an independent bookstore in Santa Monica, Zibby Books Publishing, Zibby Retreats, Zibby's Book Club, and more. Go check it out at zibbymedia.com and follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens. It'll take you where you need to go. Thanks for listening. Lee Yaron is the author of October 7th, 100 Human Stories. Lee has been a journalist with Haaretz, Israel's oldest and most award-winning newspaper, for nearly a decade. Her investigative reporting has resulted in the founding of state-level commissions and the changing of substantial bodies of Israeli policy and law. She is an elected member representative of the Executive Committee of the Union of Israeli Journalists. She has also written and directed acclaimed theater productions, notable for their use of found materials, including official government texts, to bring attention to marginalized communities both in Israel and throughout the Middle East. Born in Tel Aviv, Yaron spends her time between her native city and New York. Welcome, Lee. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss 10-7, 100 Human Stories. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Lee, this book, it just slayed me as I knew it would. Your reporting and the breadth of people that you spoke to and the intimate moments that you recreated here in not even that big a book. You know, you packed in so many perspectives, so many horrific moments and also inspiring moments. Like, you saw these glimmers of connection and helping people and all of that. Tell listeners about the book, the framework for the book, just the backstory of the book, and just, wow. After I would read it, I was having trouble sleeping, as I have for the last year, basically nonstop. But anyway, okay, give me more about it.
I started writing it in the end of October while I was very much still overwhelmed with just grief and anger and sorrow. And I felt like I needed to do something for the victims. And there's not much you can do for the dead. And the thing I could do was to write. What I've always done. I'm a journalist for Haaretz, which is the Israeli liberal newspaper, for the last decade. And I've always been focused in human stories and in the people in the margins of Israeli society, if it's asylum seekers, the LGBTQ community, women's rights, and just trying to tell the story from the bottom up. Because time and again, I've seen how these politicians that are shaping the policies that affect these people's life are also telling and mistelling their stories. And I came to understand that if I truly want to reflect a political reality, the real story lies with the real people. And I've been thinking about it from October 8th, basically, because from the beginning, we've just been flooded with all of this information and misinformation and disinformation about Israel and Palestine. But it was, again, the people in power that were also spreading their agendas, the same radical politicians. And I felt like this book is my attempt to reclaim the story of 10-7 from the people who created the crisis and return it to the people who suffered from it, to go, beyond the numbers, the cold statistics and the political agendas, to just the hearts and the homes of the people that were caught in the crossfire, and to tell their story from their perspective. So that's the framework.
So how did you go about this? 10-7 happens. We're all just, flattened by it. You decide to take on this project. How did you do it? Did you just get right out there? You start in the field, knocking on doors? How did you hold all of the grief and all of the trauma that you heard throughout the interviews? Where reading it is traumatic, and I'm sure there's so much stuff that you didn't include. And what was that like for you? I guess that was 1,000 questions, but how did you go about it? And then what was it like for you?
Okay. I mean, from the beginning, I felt like I want to represent the amazing diversity in the Israeli society. I think in American media and European media, people speak about Israelis as this one thing, but this book is covering so many communities that were hurt. I mean, there's a chapter about refugees from Ukraine that just fled Putin's aggression and see Israel, like so many other Jews have seen it through the years, as a place of refuge, of safety. And then 1 year later, they need to flee again from Hamas rockets. Or the Bedouin community, 22% of Israel is Arab Israelis, Palestinian Israelis. Nobody is speaking about them. Holocaust survivors that were also hurt. Or, of course, the kibbutzim, these amazing peace communities that did so much to promote it to state solution, and were in some kibbutzim, 10% of the population was murdered or taken hostage. So the first thing I knew was that I'm gonna represent them all. And also the underprivileged communities. I think people are also overlooking that. I mean, so many of the cities that fell victim to Hamas are among Israel poorest. I'll tell you later, in some of them, my family lived and was under this attack that morning. But truly, cities that are homes to also great populations of Mizrahim, what we call in Hebrew, or Jewish Arabs that needed to flee Arab countries when Israel was founded, like Tunisia and Morocco and Egypt, because they were deported and came to Israel. And many of them are still struggling just to make a living. So these were the first two principles. And then I just let each story to lead me to another. I chose a few stories in every community that I felt like I had to tell. And then in every interview, I would ask the family that lost their loved ones about the relationships the victim had with other victims. And I would hear these amazing stories, amazing connections. And this web of connections became the backbone of the book. And I feel like it was important for me not to tell individual stories. I think it's a mistake in the media that we always hear it like, oh, this person died and this person died. But so many of them were actually friends or neighbors, or, in one chapter, I discovered that a daughter of the Holocaust survivor that passed away, and maybe we'll speak about him, was the English teacher of the two kids I'm writing about them in captivity. So you understand that it's not individuals, it's close-knit communities that were destroyed, and people that are mourning their families and also their friends and their neighbors. So there was that, and it was incredible. I was so many times just shocked from the things I discovered.
How did you, on a personal level, handle all of it? How did you handle the conversations and then go back to, your own life? Or, I mean, I know that it is your life and it is life for so many people, but just how did you handle the heaviness without feeling hopeless?
Oh, I felt hopeless, but in the beginning, as a journalist, you try to keep your boundaries between your professional life and your private life. But on 10/7, it was from the beginning. I came to understand it was impossible. I mean, in that morning, I discovered that 20 Hamas terrorists were opening fire in the streets where my aunt and uncle live, in the small town of Ofakim, one of these core small communities. And because people there don't have the money to have a shelter in their home, even though they suffer from Hamas rockets from Gaza for nearly 20 years, when there is a rocket siren like 10/7 started, people didn't know terrorists are coming. They thought it was just another rocket attack. So people ran to the streets. And on that day, just made them easy targets for the Hamas terrorists that were waiting. And 49 residents of Ofakim died that morning. And the terrorists controlled the city for 48 hours. So we were very nervous. But in the end, my family was saved only because they were lazy. They were so used to this rocket attacks, so they decided to stay home and just hide home, and staying home saved them. So it started like that. And then 2 months later, I was in the middle of an interview with a mother that lost her child and her daughter-in-law and is now taking care of their two little daughters. And in the middle of this interview, I got a call that one of my dearest friends, Gal Eisenkot, was killed in Gaza. He was in a mission to rescue hostages. He was a reserve soldier, a student. His father is, of course, is Gadi Eisenkot, that was the head of the IDF and a minister. But Gal wasn't a military man. He wanted to be a doctor and save people. And he just went to the army on October 7th, like so many other young Israeli men that want to defend their country and bring back the hostages. And after Gal died, it was really, I found myself among these people. I was documenting. Some days it was unbearable to just do. I wrote this book really, I needed to write it very quickly. I had already, like I said, I started in the end of October, and by November and December, the book doesn't only came out in English, it's also French and German and Dutch and so many countries. And I understood from my editor that I have to write it quickly. So I had like 6 months to do all the interviews and write. So I was just interviewing all day, almost not sleeping. Like you said, you can't even sleep after you hear all of these stories. So it was at times too painful. But I have to say, it also gave me strength and it gave me a purpose. I think it saved me in many ways from depression because I had a mission. I could be their voice, the voice of the people that were silenced, and have this mission of telling their stories from their perspectives and make them remembered for who they were, for their lives and not their death. It was very important for me that this book will not be a book about death. It will be a book about their lives. And after Gal's death, when Gal died because of his father, he became this political symbol in Israel, and all of these politicians came to the funeral and were speaking about him in this way and that way. And I just felt like I lost my friend, and now all of you are like stealing him again. Mm-hmm. And I can't recognize him in all of these articles about him. And I wanted to do for these victims what we couldn't do for Gal, to just remember them for who they were.
I'm so sorry for your loss of Gal, the way it personally affected you and everything else. I'm just so sorry. I mean, it's just horrific, really horrific. When you mentioned the town where your aunt and uncle were, that was the story with the man who worked in the cemetery, correct? Was that
right?
So that was such a visual, immersive experience where he is going to bed, has to get up. Wasn't it the Sabbath? And he has to go and work because you have special dispensation to do this kind of death preparation on the Sabbath. And he used to take a long time with each body, but they were literally bringing him trucks, like refrigerated trucks of body parts that he was assembling. And oh my gosh. And each body, he said it only took like a minute or two he had to prep, and was just, I mean,
right.
The immediacy, the pain, how he didn't even stop for 50 hours. I mean, it's so powerful.
You're completely right, but there is two characters in the name of Chaim in the book. And both of them are Chaim in Hebrew, of course, it's life. But both Chaim has the job of dealing with the bodies, with the dead. So one Chaim is Chaim Rumi, which is the manager of the cemetery of Ofakim, of the city my family came from. And he's this religious man, 55 years old. He goes to the Moroccan synagogue every Shabbat. And on 10/7, it was Simchat Torah. It was a holiday. He was so excited he woke up early and was preparing to, sing and dance in the synagogue. And he began his day there. And after that, he went to his nap. And then people are knocking in his door and telling him to go to the cemetery and start burying his neighbors and friends. So in this chapter, is kind of like get to know the people when Chaim is surprised to see his friends. And then there's another chapter that is a very difficult one of the Nova Party,
Yes.
in which I had the chapter is mostly about the lives of these people. I'm going back and forth between the stories of 20 survivors and victims.
Yep.
But I chose to start it, and I was thinking a lot about whether it's too difficult to read or not, with the story of the other Chaim. And that's what you described, that he's just going there. It starts when he's also a religious man. He's hosting his parents-in-law for the holiday, when he gets this call from a rabbi he met once before. And this rabbi is telling him, you know, Chaim, they put me here in this party to guard something like 200 bodies, and
That's
I
right.
don't know what to do. And Chaim is like, can you open the video? Like, I don't, he was having a hard time to even believe this rabbi. When he saw what happened, he started driving there. And just on his way, he gets like 70 volunteers that are leaving everything under fire and just coming to assist him. And as we know in the Nova Party, that just the number of victims was too much, and they needed to do a horrible, horrible work.
Oh my gosh. Yes, sorry for conflating two chapters. Both.
No, that makes so much sense with the two Chaims.
You also sort of shined a light on lesser known stories, regions, the tour bus with all the elderly people who people watch just get. This one man, I think Danny, watched out his window as helpless as you explained why they were on the bus and how they were just trying to go to the Dead Sea for the day and how there was nothing that could be done and how people said run and of course they could barely walk and how basically just how all these how the towns, each place had this white van come through and just unleash destruction in so many ways and the terrorists everywhere. And I think that the media, or here in the US, like I feel like we hear about the festival all the time, but so much less about the other people and the other neighborhoods, the other groups. And tell me a little more about that, how you tapped into that whole group,
Right.
and that was, and how you ended that chapter saying that the two people who he had kicked off of, how the organizer had kicked two people off the tour because there wasn't enough room and they called to say thank you at the end. I mean, the whole thing is so heartbreaking. Oh my gosh.
It's a very difficult and honest story. I mean, it's a group of these elderly immigrants that came to Israel in the 90s from the former Soviet Union. And they're also living like this. They lived hard lives of like working in this minimum wage jobs after they came with Russian and needed to learn Hebrew. But they're all retired and they want to enjoy their last years. They're all, and there's this guy Alexei that is offering this like very cheap tours to the Dead Sea. It's only $20. There is a deal if you buy like 3 or 7 trips at the same time, so they all have this these little deals, and it's like no meals, no guide, but they're taking you to the Dead Sea. And it's like little families, couples, an older woman and her sister, and they dress up for these trips and they get so excited. And on that Shabbat of 10/7, a lot of people fought like each other who's going to get into the bus because there were only 19 spots. So Alexei was trying to tell some of them, like, okay, we'll push you to another week. And they said, no, we're regular customers. So in the end, this group of 19 showed up. And in the chapter, I'm like going between the different seats and telling each of their histories, which is like just hear the stories of people. Like one man was one of the soldiers in the Red Army that was in charge of cleaning Chernobyl. Then came to Israel, and you're like hearing all of these amazing, amazing life stories and, their strength, the way they struggle to build a life for their kids in Israel.
And how you point out that, for all of his exposure to Chernobyl, he gets $2,000, right? Or $2,000. It's just ridiculous. So many unfair things. Like it's just it's just so unfair. All of it is just egregious.
Exactly, exactly. A man that really he struggled all of his life, but still, he comes that day with his hat and he's excited, he's trying just to make the best of what life gave him. And they're driving just for a few minutes, and then they have a tire, and they stop in this bus station to try to fix the tire when a Hamas van is coming, and the local shelter. There was a shelter there in the
Hmm.
bus station,
Right.
and it's supposed to be this like Israeli high tech thing when the shelter is opening by itself when there's a rocket alert. But obviously, it didn't work, and they were locked, and they were calling the municipality, but no one answered, and they just became easy targets for this Hamas van that was looking for people in the streets. So it's a story that inspires me because these people are so inspiring, but it's also so painful. And it reminds me, it's right after the story of Eitan.
Hmm.
We mentioned it a bit, the kid from Ukraine. There's a community of about 50 to 60,000 people that fled Ukraine to Israel, and I think are so overlooked, these victims of two wars. And in the book, I follow the story of this 15-year-old boy. He's like a tall, handsome, funny boy that grew up in this Jewish amazing place in Odessa with all the rest of the kids. And when the attack started in February of 2022, the Putin invasion, they just flee immediately. They have this rabbi that was one of the first people to be prepared. He had a bus for all the kids, and they just drove for 20 hours and arrived to this abandoned hotel in Romania. They let him pass somehow without their passports. And he reunites with his family there after 10 years. This, like it's obviously so scary, like to run away from war. But Aidan is just so happy to be reunited with his mom again. And then they decide that together they're gonna go to Israel. And the mother is asking one of her friends, Marina, that already did Aliyah before, and she's like, "Where should we go?" So Marina is saying, "Well, there's the city of Ashkelon. It's beautiful. There's this white beach that is really like Odessa, and you should come here." And there's a little detail that it's pretty close to Gaza, but they felt so safe with the Iron Dome, and they knew that IDF is so strong, so they were sometimes sitting in the balcony and drinking a beer and seeing like the Iron Dome, taking out the rockets, and they were like, "We're safe here, we're in the Jewish country, we're safe." And then, of course, Eitan survived and his family survived, and they started a new life for the third time in 2 years now in the north of Israel, not that north to be attacked now by Hezbollah. And one of the questions that Eitan asked me that I think about a lot is, I'm only 15 and I went to two wars, and where do you think is a safe place for a Jewish kid? And I think that's one of the, I understood quickly writing it that 10/7 is not just about Israeli history. It's truly about Jewish history. And there's this another layer beneath the immediate suffering that I heard from all the families. And it's like the reopening of this wound of generations. No, I know it from my family. My name from my mother's side, my surname is Adato, which is in Hebrew gematria. It's four letters, and it's the year of 1496, which is the year that my family was deported from Portugal with the rest of the Jews of Portugal. And for 500 years, we were wandering between Italy to Turkey, then to Israel. But it was so important. I remember my grandfather telling me the story, and it was so important for every generation to speak about that, about their injustice. On my father's side were survivors of the Holocaust and just so many pogroms in Russia and Romania. And my grandparents came to Israel not as young people, and they struggled. They struggled with the language and with the culture. My grandmother was speak Ladino in home, And I always wanted to learn it. And she told me, no, you are Israeli. They really, really hope that Israel will be the end of this Jewish history in the bad way of this persecutions and pogroms. And I think on 10/7, when this fence broke, it was also just the shattering of the dream of generations that Israel will be a place of safety. I heard it from families of victims that came from Arab countries, from the former Soviet Union, from Europe, just speaking about their kids that died, but also about their parents. Maybe we can give one example of the story of Shachar Tzemach from Kibbutz Be'eri. Shachar was a young dad, this amazing peace activist, and he was a volunteer for the organization Breaking the Silence and making tours in Hebron, speaking about a two-state solution. Even wrote an article a few months before 10/7 about the fact that citizens are not supposed to carry a weapon. But on that morning, when he understands the kibbutz is attacked and no one is there to protect them, he's the first one to take weapon and go and defend the clinic where some doctors and paramedics were trying to save the people that were already injured. And he's calling the IDF all day and he's trying to get backup, but no one is coming. He's standing there for hours and hours until he ran out of bullets. And when the terrorists came, he put his hands up and he said, please, I'm not your enemy. Please don't shoot. And of course they did. And when I'm speaking with his parents, which are his parents, with his father, Doron, he tells me about his mother, Carmela. Carmela was this young 13-year-old girl in Iraq and Baghdad when the Farhud pogrom happened in 1941. And she survived that massacre when 200 of the Jewish residents of the city were killed by their Arab neighbors. And after that, as a young woman, she came to Israel and was one of the founders of this kibbutzim, really wanting her children to have a safe place. So Shahar's parents are wondering, if our mother knew what happened to her grandchild in the place she founded for his safety, what would she say? And that's something I think about a lot.
Lee, what do we do with all of this? All of this pain, all of this history of pain and yet resilience, of community, of injustice, persecution, and yet survival, sharing stories. Where do we go from here? Like, what do you want readers to take away? I personally took away that no matter what happens, the Jewish people will fight on and carry all the past and all the stories of the past and use that to sort of spur on this notion that like nothing, even no matter how bad it gets, we can get through it. So I feel one message of the book is very hopeful, but another is, it's very sad. I mean, where do we go from here? How do we hold all this pain and take a step forward?
Yeah. I mean, this book, what I want people to take from it is like a renewed sense of our shared humanity. We live in a time that is so politicized and so polarized, when it's like Israelis and Palestinians are so much in pain that we became blind to each other's grief. And I hope, and not just us, but also our allies, it's just people are forgetting to make the difference between governments and between people, and to think about, where there's so much politics and that obscures the fact that it's human suffering underneath. And I am a big believer in the power of empathy, and the power of empathy to build bridges of coexistence between people. And I think the best way to create empathy is human stories. And that's what I'm trying to do in the book in a much, deeper way than we can get from the media when we tell the stories so quickly. Another thing is, I come from the the younger generation of Israelis that not a lot of people know, but we're 50% of the Israelis were 30 years old or younger. And that fact means that we never lived in a time of true hope for peace. We were born with or after the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, which basically says with the murder of the Oslo Accords, of the peace accords with him. And in the Palestinian side, it's like more than 50% are under 18. We're all young people that were told again and again that we'll always live in wars. For me, the Intifada is my first memories of just buses exploding and running away and knowing to be careful not to be in places with a lot of people because children die. That's how I grew up. I really, really hope that after this horrible war and this horrible price we're all paying, my generation will do the best we can to try and end this conflict and find a way to live in safety. I think that was the true dream of our grandparents coming to Israel. Maybe a last thing, because we're speaking here. There's this subject that everyone is ignoring, which is the gender perspective of 10/7.
I was going to bring that up, and some of the things that you reported I had not heard before or just made my stomach turn. We know about the fact that there was so much female sort of sexual violence, but reading about it in your book in such detail, and oh my gosh. Okay, sorry, go on.
No, you're completely right. And I think, this is the most painful layer, but there's so much, just think about it. How many women are there in the Israeli cabinet of war? Not a single one. How many are there in leadership roles in the IDF? There's barely any. And in the Hamas leadership, of course, it's a joke. So we have two sides of the conflict. There's absolutely lack of women voices that are in the decision-making process. And then I'm thinking about who were the only people that warned Israel from this war.
The seers,
only
the lookers,
people were the spotters. Exactly. Or this we call them in Hebrew tatzpitaniot. They are these young soldiers, a job that is given only to women because it's so difficult. They need to sit and stare at the desert, at their cameras for hours and hours, and to report to their commanders, their male commanders, if they see any suspected activity from Hamas. And these young girls reported. They reported weeks and months before the attack, and they said, we see something unusual. And what their male commanders told them, girls, you're only the eyes, you're not the brain. And they did nothing with their reports. 16 of them were killed that morning, and 7 were taken hostage. Many of them are still there in Gaza. And I'm thinking, what happened if we listen to them? But also I'm thinking about what happened on October 4th. On October 4th, there was this huge, huge peace march of Israeli women and Palestinian women that worked together from these two organizations. Women Wage Peace from the Israeli side and Women of the Sun from the Palestinian side. And they signed together what they call the Mother's Call. They said, look, as mothers, we have so much more that unites us than separates us. And all of us just want to protect our kids. And they send letters to the leaders saying, please go back to the negotiation table. Please try and speak about a solution before we'll go to war again. And they had this beautiful march speaking about their dreams of peace and safety on October 4th. And 3 days later, the co-founder of Women Wage Peace, Vivian Silver, was murdered in her home in Kibbutz Be'eri, and 3 other members of this peace organization was murdered. So I'm thinking, what happened if we listened to them before? And how come when, everyone are now speaking about the future, what will happen in Gaza, what will be the next Israeli leadership, but no one is speaking about the absolute need to have women in both leaderships, whatever they'll be. So I think, in this podcast that is all about women power and moms, it's a message that is really important for me. And I really hope that, we, the young Israeli women will step up and will go to politics and will try to make the change.
Well, I have to say, as you've been talking, in my head, I'm thinking, I am talking now to someone who in 20 years is going to be in charge of this whole country. Like I'm just sure of it. Whatever you set your mind to, like, and that fills me with hope that someone like you can pick up the mantle, and it just fills me with so much hope. You're amazing. The book was
Thank you so much.
amazing. I could talk to you about all the stories. We didn't even touch on some of the ones that hit me. It's just incredible, essential reading. So important. Gives such context to everything else that's going on. And it's also sort of a mitzvah to the lost souls that we can all now get to know them like this, thanks to you. So, Lee, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is such a gift, and it is amazing. You're amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's so important for us to have the American Jewish community, to be remembering with us and understanding, the complexity of the situation. So I really, really appreciate you and your listeners taking the time to remember these stories. And I hope for that, now that we're entering the high holidays, that we'll have a Shana Tova, a better one than this year. So thank you so much.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Bye, Lee. Thank you.
Bye. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you love it, please leave a review and follow us on social at Zibby Owens and at Zibby Readers.